For our last presenter today. He is David Freeman. He will be talking about 4 leadership mistakes to avoid. David, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. Let me share my screen here. You guys see that, right? Everybody sees that? I don't hear anything.
Yes, we do.
Okay, good. So one day I got a phone call. It was 20th Century Fox inviting me to be an executive vice president. I misheard them. I thought they said that I was going to be the executive president in charge of Vice. I got so excited. I thought, wow, I get to spread the 7 deadly sins across the corporation. I thought I would start with pride, move on to laziness, and then the ever popular lust. But then my boss said, you're not going to be the executive president in charge of Vice. You're going to be an executive vice president. I felt like I'd been kicked out of paradise. I was so despondent. And then what happened is Disney bought Fox, and I thought, a new company, a new beginning. This is just exactly what I need to get back my badass inner fire. And it lasted for a while, but soon I sunk back into the despair and gloom that I live with still today. And I'm hoping you are going to help me with that by allowing me to take the focus onto something else. Let's talk about you. Have you ever been sitting around one day thinking of what are you going to do next? And then you go and you invent the best car company in the world, and you invent the best rocket company in the world, and you invent the best satellite company in the world. And then you repel the CAC invasion. You become the most wealthy individual on the planet. And you realize you are not like other people. In fact, you're a god. Are you happy? Oh yeah, you're happy. But one thing mars your happiness. There's one thing that you want. You want the bird. Do you buy the bird? Yeah, you buy the bird. But unfortunately, you electrocute the bird. And then this happens. Elon Musk has lost more money than anyone in history, Guinness record says. So how do you feel? I just stopped working. You feel like this. I can relate. And you know what you need to do. You need to study leadership. All you have to do is read these 20 leadership books. Well, wait a minute. Then you have to read these 25 other leadership books. Then you have to read these 33 leadership books. In fact, Harvard says there have been over 15,000 books written on leadership. Now, here's the good news. You do not need to read 15,000 leadership books. You just need to read the last 2,000 leadership books. Now, I am not smart enough to go head to head with 15,000 leadership gurus. Besides, none of them have written the book that I want to read, which is this one, How to Be a Bad Leader. I couldn't put it down by Kim Jong-un. That's the book for me. And that's what my talk is about today. I'm going to tell you 4 ways to be a bad leader. Let's start with this one, lead by example. Of course, there's no end of leadership books saying that this is the secret for great leadership. I disagree. I have been part of 2 startups that went under because the narcissistic, megalomaniac founder thought he could do everybody's job better than they could. And I know 4 other companies that went under for the same reason. Am I supposed to follow the example of that kind of leader? But let's dial it down a little bit. I myself have missing pieces. I'm always working on them. And I wouldn't want the people under me to use me as an example and copy not the good stuff, just the good stuff, but all the missing pieces as well. And so I say, don't lead by example, lead by values. So that's the first way to be a bad leader. Here's the second way, to tell the truth. Now, of course, there are many business books saying that telling the truth is the secret to being a great leader. I disagree. Let me tell you a story. I'm going to move to speaker mode. So when I was at Disney, we were all in my office, my entire extended team, and I was being yelled at by the boss, who accused me of something I did not do. I said, why are you yelling at me? That woman over there, she's the one who's responsible. Well, the woman I pointed out burst into tears. She got up, she left the room, and later, another woman who was in the room, she was in HR, but part of my extended group, and I called her my mentor because she was so wise. She said, that was a really bad leadership decision. I go, why? She goes, you should have had her back. And I said, I was being blamed for something that I didn't do. Why should I take the responsibility for that? And she said, you're the head of this group. You should have the back of every single person in it. I knew she was right. I felt terrible. That woman who I had upset was wise. She was kind, extremely competent. It took a year for me to get back on her good side. Well, let's roll forward a year and a half. We're in the boss's office and we're all being yelled at again for another screw up. And this time I had learned my leadership lesson. This time I wasn't going to tell the truth. I was going to lie. And I said, hey, they had nothing to do with it. It was completely my responsibility. And the boss said, David, that's not true. I know what he did and she did and what he did. And I said, I was the one who signed off on this thing. It's all my responsibility. If you're going to blame anyone, blame me. If you're going to punish anyone, punish me. Well, it all blew over in a day and a half. Nobody got punished. But I'll tell you that my team was so loyal to me after that. It just really cemented us as a group because I had learned my leadership lesson, which was to tell a lie instead of telling the truth. The next way to be a bad leader is to lead with purpose. Now, of course, there's endless business books about how to lead with purpose and the importance of it. I have my doubts. What if it's a bad purpose? Exxon made $55.7 billion last year because they exploited the Ukraine war as an excuse to gouge people on prices around the world, contributing to the inflation you experienced and we experienced. But they did lead with purpose. Secondly, over 100,000 people were laid off in the tech sector in America this year alone. Are you telling me that when these people move to their next company, they're supposed to embrace whatever the grand purpose is behind that company, knowing that they could get laid off, that they're disposable, that they could get laid off any minute? I think you better have a backup plan to motivate these people. The next thing is, a job is not a religion to every single person. Some people, their purpose might be their family or traveling. So what about them? Anyway, the idea of leading with purpose may sound great, but a lot of people may not buy into that and be there for other reasons, and you have to address them where they are. And the last way to be a bad leader is to facilitate productive teams. Now, this sounds like what could be wrong with that? There's so many books about facilitating productive teams. Well, here's a couple things that are wrong with that. Jake Knapp worked for 5 years at Google, where he led brainstorming groups to come up with solutions. He said not a single new idea generated in the brainstorms had been built or launched. The best ideas, the solutions the teams actually executed, came from individuals. So after that, he would just send individuals to come up with ideas. The teams would iterate. But even worse about facilitating productive teams is what happens if you have someone who's not a team player, a visionary in your group. This happened in Disney in 1983. They had this guy, this 26-year-old guy. He was not a team player. He didn't want to make 2D animation. He wanted to make 3D animation. And they fired him for not being a team player. He went over and joined George Lucas at a small division there. That division was bought by this guy in 1986 for $5 million, who added $5 million later on. And you know who these people are. They're John Lasseter and Steve Jobs. And of course, there was also part of the inner group, Ed Catmull, who I understand in 2016 did a great speech at the forum. Well, anyway, you know the company they created is Pixar. They made all of these movies. They were outperforming Disney left and right. Disney had to buy them and did in 2006. They paid $7.4 billion for the company. Most of that went to Steve Jobs, who ended up with 7% of Disney, the single biggest shareholder in the company. In today's money, that's $18 billion or 16.88 billion euros. So because this guy, they were trying to facilitate productive teams, and this guy was not a team player, they fired him, and it cost them 16.88 billion euros. Now, just to be clear on this, that's money they threw away. Had they not been trying to facilitate productive teams, had they not fired John Lasseter, they could have had Pixar for free. What a waste of money. And by the way, if the only benefit that you get out of my talk is it saves you personally 16.88 billion euros, I'm going to feel content. So that's the fourth way to be a bad leader. We looked at 4 ways to be a bad leader, and they are lead by example, tell the truth, lead with purpose, and facilitate productive teams. And there are many other principles like this. Now, there are 2 takeaways I hope you get from this talk. The first takeaway is that principles like these do work 60 to 85% of the time. That's not science, that's my experience, but that's what I've concluded. That's why you study them. That's why I study them. That's why we'll always read books about them and hear speakers about them, to learn how to get better at them and to learn how to implement them without mistakes. And even though I made fun of leading with purpose, I myself am very purpose driven. When I'm working with branding clients of mine, I always try to focus on their purpose. And when I was at Disney, I led with purpose. So I see the positive sides to these things too. It's just that they don't work every time. We're not quite ready for takeaway number 2. First, I want to talk about AI. I like AI as much as the next person. I made almost every slide in this presentation using AI. Now we're ready for takeaway number 2, which is I know your destiny. Your destiny is to make AI very sad or very angry. Here's why. You can do things AI cannot. People are unique. Everyone's an individual. What works with one person does not work with another. And therefore, it takes your experience and wisdom to know how to deal with different types of people. And it's the same thing with these leadership principles. They work a lot of the time. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes they end up in disaster. And AI could never tell you when to apply these principles and when not to apply these principles. It takes everything you are. It takes all of your heartbreaks and challenges. It takes all of your triumphs and achievements. Everything that you've learned with your mind and your heart, everything you've picked up from your friends. And only with this experience and wisdom can you decide when these things are applicable and when not to apply them. Well, I began by saying that I wasn't going to say anything about how to be a good leader, but now, if you want to be a bad leader, you know 4 great ways to do it. And thank you for your time.
Thank you, David, for that very thought-provoking and very nuanced talk. Thank you very, very much for that. Jury members have not expressed to me that they want to ask a question, but I'd like to ask you a question. You have these 4 leadership mistakes to avoid, and they are very insightful. There's a lot of nuance around these. They don't work all the time. If you had to tell us a 5th mistake that you've seen in your long and distinguished career at Disney and at 21st Century Fox as the president of Vice, the vice president, what would that be?
Oh, there's so many. Almost any leadership principle that the people write books about have places where it doesn't work. Here's one: trust your inner circle of advisors. Now, when I was at Disney, the first thing I did is create a trusted circle of advisors, and I leaned on them very heavily. And I always asked them before any initiative, what could go wrong? But even though that sounds like a great idea, I'll tell you a place that it almost caused the extinction of this planet. In 1962, we had the Cuban Missile Crisis with the Soviet Union putting missiles in Cuba, and President Kennedy drew around him his trusted circle of advisors. And you know what they wanted him to do? They wanted him to invade Cuba, which would have triggered World War III. And when I say his trusted circle, I mean the head of the Army, the head of the Marines, the head of the Navy, the head of the Air Force. It would have been a mass extinction event for this planet had he trusted his inner circle. 80 million to 100 million Americans would have been killed, which of course would have been a huge tragedy because Americans are notoriously overweight. And with all those people being killed at the same time, that would have thrown the entire world out of balance. All of everyone else on the world would have been flung into space. None of you would be here because your grandparents would be flying by Jupiter right now. So anyway, I'm telling you, no matter what the business principle is, there's a place where it doesn't work.
Thank you so much for that. Thank you so much, David.